Now, I think it is official. So we have moved into topic 4 having to do with conflict and cohesion. Well, it sounds like such a serious topic, but I think it's very befitting for all of the things that are going on in our country and globally. So, welcome to class this morning and see how we can learn and glean some new information in order to develop better skills in small groups. So let's go ahead and get underway. Today we will begin topic 4, which has to do with conflict and cohesion. We will discuss types of group conflict, such as personal conflict, task conflict, procedural conflict, constructive conflict, and additionally, destructive conflict. We'll learn traditional conflict styles and management strategies and a few models that will help to navigate through conflict resolution, conflict and member diversity, as well as group cohesion, and we'll finalize everything with group thinking. All right, here we go. Okay, so the overall objective for learning about week 7 in conflict and cohesion, we will identify types of group conflict, identify specific behaviors or as constructive or destructive. We will also learn how to describe how conflict helps or hinders a group in achieving their goal, describe various conflict styles, as well as conflict management strategies. This information is from your textbook in Chapter 8. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It might be a good idea for you guys to try to get to your on Chapter 8, just in case we need to go over information. I'm going to have you write down these terms that I want you to become familiar with. So I'll give you a few moments to go ahead and write these down, and I will assign a few of these to look up the actual definition and then share with the class your definition and interpretation. I'm going to start with Olivia. You're going to have collaboration. And Cassandra, you have compromise. And Jennifer, you have avoidance. David, you have accommodation. And Tage, you have competition. Next, I'd like you to jot down a few new terms that you will need to know with regard to this particular lecture. The first one is collaboration, compromise, avoidance, accommodation, and competition. Jot those down, okay? Okay, now we have a few more terms that I want you to look up, and
clear to be present for the rest of.
I see Mason has just joined us. So let's see, we're going to have Vitalik, you take negotiation, and Merripp, you take mediation, and Mason, you take arbitration. The next set of terms that I'd like you to become familiar with have to do with a few models as well as some topical areas that you need to become familiar with. The first one is the 4Rs method, the AEIOU model, negotiation, mediation, and arbitration. I'd like for you to take a few moments to write those down, and then we'll come back and have you give the definitions for these. Here we go. Okay, so just to confirm, um, Olivia, we'll go back and start with you. Were you able to look up the term that you have?
And not yet. I was still writing down the other terms.
Okay, we'll go back to it afterwards, so no worries. I'll give you a little bit, all of you, a little bit of time to look it up in a few moments. We'll move forward. So now that we have a few new terms under our belts, I'd like to move on into confirming some of the information having to do with constructive conflict. Within this approach, the approach tends to disagree with group members as they express different ways that value everyone's contribution and promote the overall group goals. For example, researchers Kenneth Cloak and Joan Goldsmith, I believe, explain that we all have a choice about how to really deal with conflict. They state that we can treat it as a dialectic experience that imprison us, or lead us on a journey as a battle that embitters us, or as an opportunity for learning. I hope we do take it as the opportunity for learning for sure in developing our choices between those that are contrasting attitudes and approaches that will truly shape the way conflicts unfold. The goal is to learn how to resolve conflict. Now let's move into finding out a little bit more about conflict in groups and also types of group conflicts. We have mentioned that there are four main areas that we'll look into having to do with personal conflict, task conflict, procedural, and constructive conflict. So let's go through and give a brief definition of what these mean. Starting with this personal conflict, it has to do with personal conflict as looking at it as a disagreement among group members and how it's related to differences having to do with personalities and communication styles. And these cause conflicting core values and beliefs. This stems from personal conflict. Next, we look at task conflict. Task conflict is also a disagreement among group members having to do with different ideas or issues, actions, and goals. For example, it happens in a debate, if you would, among members, such as having to do with a new procedure within a committee or hiring process, having to think about the strengths and weaknesses of their the top decisions that they need to consider, and it causes a type of conflict in this particular task in coming to an agreement. It tends to focus on the group's goal of selecting the best idea, person, or concept for the project or job. And that's more of the task-orientated type of conflict. Next, we look at procedural conflict. Here, it tends to have a disagreement among group members among a certain process or a method or a policy that the group needs to utilize. So this has to do with developing what procedure needs to be carried out, and it's considered as a procedural conflict. Makes sense, right? Next, we move into more of the constructive areas, as we mentioned a little earlier, having to do with this approach to disagreement where these group members express different ways of their values, contributing to promote the overall goal for the group. Okay, great. Okay, so make sure you have jotted these new terms of conflict in groups. One, personal conflict, task, procedural, and constructive. We'll go into more on these. Okay. Now let's take a look at the destructive conflict. This has to do with disagreement that is expressed through behaviors that create hostility and actually prevent the group from achieving its overall goal. So as you can see here on the information on this particular chart, it has a contrast between the constructive conflict and destructive conflict, which under constructive we see that they focus on the idea and the task and the group goal. They're respective, supportive, flexible, collaborative, they cooperate with each other, and they commit to the group goal. Whereas in the destructive category, it tends to focus on interpersonal differences and having lack of respect and maybe being disrespectful, defensiveness, being inflexible, over competitive, uncooperative, and in general, just indifferent to the group and its goals. I think this is a great chart to be able to give a contrast and comparative narrative to these two areas of conflict. Of course, the goal is to have this constructive style of resources and skills that we're developing in conflict resolution. Now let's identify some different styles of traditional conflict styles that we often come across in team dynamics. Specifically, our text states that there are 5 traditional conflict styles. One is this idea of avoiding the situation of conflict. Second, accommodating. Next, competing. Fourth, compromising. And fifth, collaborating. So these styles reflect the tension between seeking personal goals and working cooperatively to achieve the group's final goal. And so these are some of the typical traditional conflict styles that we see in group and team dynamics that we should become aware of. Okay, so with this in mind, I'm going to ask Cassandra, are you there this morning?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Cassandra, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Let's just kind of review a couple of these to get a better understanding of, can you address what this avoiding style of conflict might look like? Any example that you might be able to reflect upon?
I'm sorry, I kind of didn't hear you. Did you say to go over avoiding?
Yes, on avoiding. So this is a style that individuals might come across in the small group dynamic, and they tend to avoid. Can you give me an illustration of what that might mean or look like?
Yeah, I could even be personally related to it because I'm a very passive person. So when it comes to conflicts, I would rather just either keep my head down or be quiet to avoid then a confrontation that could lead into like an argument or something.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's great to be able to see how we fit into this, and within a group dynamic, I think it's a thing that we have of sitting back and being needed as needed, perhaps, and if it's our personality type, for sure, we tend to try to avoid conflict. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to go to Jennifer. Jennifer, are you there? Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Jennifer. Can you reflect upon one of these that you might be able to relate with as far as how you might um, handle conflict?
For me, it would probably be the compromising.
Okay, and can you explain a little bit more?
So it's kind of like an approach where we kind of like all come together to achieve the goal, I guess you can say.
Okay, so
Mhm.
you're finding that in your style of resolution and conflict, you kind of are that type that you're willing to compromise. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for sharing, you guys. Yeah, I think it's important for us to, put a personal spin on it to make sure we're able to see how and if we do these certain things as well, so we can find ways to overcome or make a better representation for our time spent in these small groups. So yeah, of course we know as far as collaborating, maybe coming up with some ideas where we can work together, and so that's something I think we all try to do with regard to group and team dynamics. Also, this competing, sometimes that might come out with individuals that might be a little bit more aggressive, maybe the type A personalities as well, of kind of rising above the occasion and maybe taking control. So yeah, it's good to identify with these personally. Thanks for sharing on that. Next, I have this diagram that I did pull up having to do with better identifying some of these styles. So as you can see on this particular graph, we see a high-low areas of concern for our goals, of which, individuals might have either a very high estimation of competing, um, I love it. I win, you lose kind of thing. It's just sometimes that is the way people see it. And then the low area for those that tend to avoid might be on that concern for the goals, okay? Because ideally, the mission is in these groups is to make sure we are successful in the project we're focusing on. And then as you can see on the vertical here, it says concern for the group's goals. So this is the group in general. So we want to make sure that we understand that the collaborative is where we all win. And then on the low end, we see accommodating and giving in, basically putting our own goals and options of maybe shining in the group or whatever, to make sure that the group's concerns are being met. So I just thought that this was a very well illustrated graph. Now I'd like to take a moment to elaborate a little bit more on the types of conflict management strategies that we can utilize within group and team dynamics. And they're pointed out here as four different categories to look at. The first one has to do with the 4Rs method. Next, the AEIOU model. Next, we have the cooperative or negotiative model. And then the last one is anger management. Let's take a closer look. With this model known as the 4Rs method, it has to do with when individuals in a group are confronted by conflict, Perhaps students should practice, or employees and or team members should practice the 4 R's. Recognize the issue, respond with respect, resolve, and then finally, number 4, reflect. Okay, sorry, just to give you time to make sure you're recognizing the 4 R's method. Again, recognize, respond, and always try to use respect, and resolve, try to come up with resolution and change, and then give yourselves time to reflect upon what is being asked of the group or what's being asked of you individually. And we'll come back and review this a little bit more um, with the class today. Well, this next model should be easy to remember. AEIOU: acknowledge, express, identify, look for the outcomes, and understanding. So now that we know what AEIOU model stands for, we need to understand that it can be used to resolve a variety of standoffs within team environments, in the workplace, issues between employee and employer, peer-to-peer issues, having to do with organizational groups, founder, co-founder, and it really helps the group or the client work through this confrontational mindset. So take time to utilize and think about this particular model as well. I think it's very helpful. As we can see here on this chart under the descriptions, the A has to do with assume that others mean well, you know, and in a group environment, sometimes I think we look at individuals that might have separate motives for being involved in the group. So within this A, acknowledge that and assume that others do really mean well. The E has to do with expressing ourselves, expressing our feelings, making sure that we understand our position and make sure we are using good emotional strength and not being too needy as far as being overly emotional in expressing our feelings correctly and appropriately. The I, identify your goals. Make sure you have a clear understanding. Oftentimes in classes, meetings, workshops, etc., sometimes life happens and we might miss out on information. We might arrive late. So you need to make sure you have a clear understanding of the outcomes and the objective of the group. And the last one, you, understanding on a mutual basis to make sure that the goals will be achieved. So yeah, I like this simple model of the AEIOU. As we strive to learn more about conflict and cohesion and how we can utilize these strategies into solutions, we need to focus on cooperative styles of negotiation. When we talk about being cooperative, we're looking really as to collaborate specifically with an interest base of negotiation that will affect both parties in an effort to jointly meet and satisfy mutual interests. So this negotiation or this style should focus on attacking the problem posed by negotiation, not by attacking each other. This cooperation approach or cooperative approach really aligns with this process of specifically interest-based, and it's a type of bargaining to come to grips with finding a win-win solution. So we look to negotiate to find a solution and more likely develop a positive relationship having to do with real trust and find these ways to come up with mutual benefits for the solution and the settlement for positive negotiation. At this time, I'd like to ask a question. I'm going to ask David. David, are you available? Is David there? David, don't slip out on me. Okay, how about Vitalik? Vitalik, are you there with me? Wow. Okay, you guys need to stay present. This is having to do with participation. How about Merritt? Merritt, are you there?
Yes,
Good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm good.
Good, good. Thanks for responding. So I just want to go over this term where we see it's referred to as interest-based negotiation. So I want to make sure that the class understands what that is. So can you share a little bit just in your own words, what do you feel that means, interest-based?
About the negotiation mean is discuss two group and just negotiation and then
Okay.
For example, when we buy the house, so we have to negotiation and the good price, and then we have to and then is the we have to negotiation fast, and then the price that agree, so we have to go what I expect is go, so the seller and buyer negotiation together, and then the seller and buyer agree one go, and then we have to complete the job.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, that's a very nice illustration. So the interest would be the agreement of the cost and the contract of the house. That would be the interest base, right? So, we wanted to make sure that it's mutually satisfying for both. So when we look at the interest-based negotiation, we want to make sure that we're keeping our eye on the ball and not getting involved in other areas that really can make us lose focus on closing the deal. So thank you so much for your contribution, and you did a great job. Thank you. Anger management. Wow. Yeah, other than the movie, there is really a system involved in anger management. And it really is this process of really learning how to recognize signs and signals that kind of trigger you becoming angry. With that, learning how to take action to these triggers to calm down and really deal with the situation in a more productive way. This anger management doesn't really have to keep you from feeling angry or upset. However, the idea is to encourage you to find ways to manage being angry, such as taking a step back and thinking before you speak. Also, learn ways to develop calmness. That old idea, count to 5 or count to 10. Maybe take a walk, get some exercise. Put yourself in a personal timeout. Yeah. Maybe make a list of possible solutions. Write down some situations that are making you angry. And also look at when you're sharing with others, don't point the finger. Make sure you talk about yourself and use I statements. Try not to hold a grudge. And always, humor really helps to release tension. So try that as well. Anger management. We can all do it. Okay, with this being one of those topics that I think we all can relate to one way or another, I'd like to go to Mason. Mason, are you here with us? Mason. Okay, Tage, you're on.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good
So
morning.
this what we're going through right now with this anger management. Um, do you ever find yourself in situations of, getting angry? And if so, how do you deal with and manage anger?
So, actually, yeah, there are times where I do find myself getting angry.
Mhm.
But lately, as like I've been trying to mature and not handle problems with anger or respond with anger, I just kind of take a step back and breathe and tell myself, when you get angry, you're giving people power over over your emotions, and you're letting them control you. So I just kind of have to like self-talk myself down and think it's not worth it. Life's too short. Um, and if it's a real problem, I
Mhm.
talk it out, or if it's someone who I don't really care about, I'll just walk away. So like that's how I try to handle the situations. But ultimately, I don't want to give people the power over me. So that's how. But I do find myself getting angry sometimes. Definitely.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that, because I mean that's so honest and very mature of how you're learning to deal with this and taking control over it. Yeah, giving power over to others, I think, is really a skill that we need to learn how to manage. So that is a great example of managing it. Good job. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Mhm. Now we're going to go change it up a little bit and talk about conflict and member diversity. Let's take a quick look at conflict and member diversity having to do with team involvement and group dynamics. We need to look at the cultural values that are involved in the individuals within the group and the membership, and how these group members influence the degree of the comfort with conflict and how it's really resolved. There's already tension if there are cultural differences, and, in learning about others' cultures, certain things might be inappropriate from a cultural standpoint. Even between genders, between men and women, for example, um, men and women from similar cultures don't always differ significantly in terms of conflict strategies and styles, but we have to consider that these genders may differ in terms of their expectations on one another and within the conflict situations. Yeah, it goes back to this thought that, men are from Venus and women are from Mars, or vice versa. But sometimes within our gender, we just handle things differently. Some women tend to like to talk it out and maybe find the resolve and discussion, whereas men, they are really individuals that often like to keep to a system and make sure everything is within certain categories. So, based on research, between genders, we tend to communicate differently. And with that, we might not really understand the approach of conflict, but also, again, with diversity, because we're brought up differently, different cultures, different values, then we might have a different perspective about resolve and conflict strategy. So yeah, I like this area of awareness having to do with diversity. Next, let's focus on group cohesion. The key to finding solution. The text states that there are 5 major types of group cohesion having to do with social cohesion within group and team dynamics. We have task cohesion, collective, emotional cohesion, and structural cohesion. So we need to look at this as finding ways of which groups can really promote this cohesion by establishing a true group identity and also maybe some group traditions. We talked about, celebrating milestones and making sure that you have aligned various teamwork responsibilities and that you're really recognizing and rewarding the contribution of all of those that are within this prospective groups. Also, we need to make sure that you have areas of think tanks available and group think sessions available in order to make sure that group members value the consensus. This is highly needed to establish an area of really making decisions and making sure that everyone is contributing. It states that highly cohesive teams and groups have a greater risk of succumbing to groupthink, such as recognizing and rewarding contributions and making sure you're respecting individuals and their individual contributions. It's so important having to do with that. Groupthink also occurs when group members value the consensus and make sure that you are staying focused on the group and the group needs. There's a quote that states that, or a statement that Obama encouraged his team to speak their minds openly and really freely express their doubts as a strategy of avoiding groupthink. In the end, it was, as it was mentioned, that the president who made all the final decisions anyway. But it's important to hear and value the group and the group members' contributions. As you can see here on this chart, it has an overview of groupthink and specifically groupthink symptoms and descriptions and the expressions that occur within groupthink. Or group thinking. So as you can see, if you just kind of go through this list, you can help to identify some of the possibilities of the symptoms. Invulnerability, rationalization, morality, stereotyping outsiders, self-censorship, pressure on dissent, and the illusion of misguiding our think process and mind guarding. So these are some things definitely to look into and review, having to do with the symptoms and what group think looks like. Yeah, so these descriptions, when we are in this group environment and we see the situation of those individuals might be overly confident, willing to take these big risks. Additionally, making those excuses, discounting warnings and things that people have said maybe we should or shouldn't. Well, we need to make sure that aware of these excuses that are being made, ignores ethical and moral consequences, considers opposition too weak and stupid to make real trouble. That's hard. What about self-censorship, doubts his or her own reservations? I think a lot of us do this, and we tend to stay quiet based on that, not really contributing our thoughts and our ideas. Pressures for members to agree. Sometimes there's this silent pressure that takes place. Taking this idea that everyone is on the same page and believing that everyone is in agreement. We need to be aware of that. And then finally, mind guarding shields members from adverse information or opposition. Adverse information or opposition. So, we need to, think about this. This is something that you can take with you as a takeaway as some of these groupthink symptoms. Let's take a look at this great video clip having to do with learning effective conflict resolution techniques. I think it is really helpful. Take a look. Okay, so we'll watch this video quickly, and then after we'll come back and go over some of the definitions that we asked about a little earlier. So after this, we'll go back to that.
Brainy Dose presents 14 effective conflict resolution techniques. When we have a difference of opinion with somebody, we often try to correct them, to convince them that our point of view is correct and theirs is not. After all, we would never hold a point of view we thought is wrong. Yet, we all know from experience how difficult it is to get others to admit to being wrong. It is usually not only futile, it often leads to real conflict. Thankfully, there are a number of effective conflict resolution strategies, so consider giving them a try. Number 1, don't get defensive. In any conflict, whether it's professional or personal, we all feel the urge to rush to our defense. You may find yourself constantly trying to correct the other person's position with "but," "nevertheless," "however," in defense of your own position before they are even finished explaining their opinion. Try turning the situation around. How do you feel when another person is constantly contradicting you and seems unwilling to consider your opinion? Take a moment and really try to see things their way. They have reasons for their point of view, just as you do for yours. This doesn't mean that you have to accept their position, but if you let them know you are taking them seriously, you can avoid things getting personal. Try using phrases such as, "I understand what you mean," and "that's a valid point." Signal that you respect their opinion, even if you don't agree. Number 2, avoid the blame game. When you feel under attack and go on the offensive, even calling the other person's character or intelligence into question, you cannot really win. All you've done is made an enemy. Avoid blaming others. Instead, establish an atmosphere of respect, one in which everyone can safely express themselves. Let others state and explain their points of view without launching an attack. Number 3, listen actively. Perhaps the greatest way to resolve a conflict is by really listening. You want to express yourself, so let others express themselves. Instead of listening just to discover flaws and formulating counter-arguments while they are speaking, listen to what they have to say. You may discover that you didn't really understand the point the other person was actually making. You may discover common ground. In any case, they will respect you for listening. Number 4, begin statements with "I." When you begin statements with "you," it sounds like you are pointing a finger at the other person. This actually betrays a weakness on your part. Your opinion should stand on its own merits, not rely on another person's flaws. If you think that the other person is not allowing you to express yourself, Just let them know how that affects you. "I feel like I'm not being understood" is far less confrontational than "you aren't listening." The first statement relates to yourself. The second one is directed at the other person and destined to put them on the defensive. This can make a big difference in a conversation. These kinds of "I" statements give the other person a chance to pause and rethink their own behavior. It can lead to an atmosphere of mutual respect. Number 5, tame your emotions. Speaking in anger or frustration is a bad strategy for resolving conflicts. When you're emotional, your rational thinking shuts down and you can't formulate an acceptable outcome. Don't unload your emotions on others. Wait until you calm down so that you can discuss things in a reasonable manner. Throw a tantrum if you want, but do it before you speak with them. When you are calm and rational, you can make your own points better, and you are open to different perspectives. Number 6, show that you can compromise. Depending on the situation, some approaches to conflict management may be more effective than others. Sometimes, simply being accommodating and avoiding conflict is the best move, especially if you don't care much, one way or the other. A competitive strategy might be much more useful when you have to come to some sort of decision and need to assert yourself. In most conflicts, however, the only way to come to some sort of resolution is through compromise. You have to come to some acceptable agreement in order to move forward. Show others that you don't always have to insist on your own way, even if you still think you are right. Others will appreciate you for putting a solution before your own pride. Number 7, don't badmouth someone to others. Unless you really need to, you should not spread around details of a conflict you are having with someone. You will only make them feel betrayed, and the only way they can defend themselves is by badmouthing you. This does not make you look good. There are other ways to vent anger or frustration than talking someone down. If you just have to do that, do it in front of a mirror, write it down, or talk to someone who doesn't know who you are talking about. Trust and respect are essential for resolving conflicts. Number 8, don't take it personally. We tend to regard our opinions or actions as a direct reflection of who we are, so we get defensive. However, when someone disagrees with your opinion or criticizes your performance, don't take it as an attack on you personally. Someone might think your opinion is flawed or your performance can stand improvement, but that does not mean they think you are a terrible person. They may even have a point. Realize that if you can distinguish between what they are criticizing and yourself as a person, it will become much easier to avoid personal conflict or resolve differences in a way that is acceptable to everyone concerned. Number 9, pay close attention to nonverbal communication. Dealing with conflicts directly is not everyone's forte. Some people prefer to be accommodating or even avoid conflict whenever possible. They are uneasy with conflict and would rather say or do almost anything just to spare themselves an unpleasant situation. This can lead to building emotional pressure. Since they are not being honest with you, you may not be aware of this until it comes to a head. So, don't just take people at their word. Be aware of nonverbal communication that betray emotions, such as body language, facial expressions, eye contact, and voice tonality. "I'm okay" should not be very convincing if they are sighing, averting their eyes, or fidgeting. If you learn to pay attention to these cues, you will sense when their words do not match their feelings. Then you can take steps to encourage them to be more honest with you. Number 10, prioritize resolving the conflict over being right. You might think that someone is being unfair to you or that something just isn't right. Maybe you regard yourself as the victim of a compromise, or perhaps of some change of policy at work. You can easily get frustrated and emotional about it. Usually, the situation is not just about you. Calm down and reassess things. The compromise or decision might have been made for the sake of the common good. Yes, you may indeed be right, but you should consider whether you really want to insist on your point of view at the cost of the conflict and resentment it may cause. Not every battle is worth fighting. Number 11, Know when to apologize and forgive. Telling someone, "I'm sorry," can be very difficult. This is especially true when you feel like you have nothing to apologize for. And if someone has hurt you in some way but won't admit to the wrong, you may get so upset that you won't ever want to forgive them. Yet, you should consider that resolving a conflict is often preferable to maintaining your pride. People make mistakes, and just like you, might have a problem admitting to them. If you can put aside your resentment and forgive them, you could make way for an even better relationship with them. Resentment is a bad investment of time and energy. Number 12, focus on the present, not the past. When you are in a conflict with someone, it can begin to get personal. You may start to remember other conflicts you had with them in the past and get resentful. You might even bring them up in order to attack them, even though it may have nothing to do with the issue at hand. One way to avoid this is to use a 48-hour rule. If someone does or says something that bothers you, bring it up with them within 48 hours. If you don't, just let it go. Don't use past conflicts as a weapon when you are engaged in a new conflict. The other person will resent you for doing so, and it will just make it harder to come to a resolution. Number 13, use humor when appropriate. Humor is a great technique for dissolving tension. It's hard to be upset when you're laughing, right? But you must be careful. You should avoid humor that could offend your counterpart or makes fun of his or her position, or anything else that might be sensitive to them. Be aware of the other person's sense of humor. Some people can take a joke, but others can't. Use humor only as a way to break the tension and focus at least temporarily on something other than the subject of conflict. Self-deprecating humor, poking fun at yourself, is one method for achieving this. A well-timed humorous remark might be all that is needed to calm emotions and make all involved parties more receptive to a practical resolution. Number 14, remember the importance of the relationship. At a given moment, the topic of contention might seem to be extremely important. Conflicts, however, arise constantly and are almost always temporary in nature. Solutions are almost always discovered. Remember, relationships usually last, for good or ill. Insisting on your point of view is rarely worth the cost of losing a friend or worsening any relationship. After all, conflicts tend to fade, but people usually stick around. How will they regard you? Think about how important the subject of discussion is to you, compared to the relationship you have with your contender. Make sure you weigh the gains of winning against what they can cost. Maintaining good relationships will better enable you to resolve future conflicts. What do you think? How do you deal with conflict? Do you use any of these strategies? Share your thoughts and comments below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share with your friends so we can keep making them. For more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and remember to click on the notification bell. Also, be sure to check out.
Okay. Wow. I just so appreciate that that video clip. I think it was so informative and really highlights life and all of the different elements that we experience having to do with managing our conflict and the emotions and behavior and attitudes, all of those. So I have, listed the 14 effective conflict resolution techniques here so that you can just kind of have those. I think that they really do apply more than we think. And so I want to just give you a time to make sure that you are writing those down, specifically defensiveness. Number one, avoid blaming, listen actively, use I statements. Wow, that's a good one. Avoid being too emotional, try to compromise, don't give in to gossip, don't badmouth others, don't be defensive. I think we can often try to cross those arms and get defensive really quickly. when we don't feel we're being heard. Number 9, check out nonverbal communication. We went over that, the effects of nonverbal last week, and there's so many different elements to realizing what's going on within that nonverbal communication. Also, choose to resolve over conflict, okay? Go into the situation looking to resolve it, not to extend the conflict. Apologize and forgive quickly. Focus on the past, and focus on the present and do not focus on the past. Actually, I think we often do hold a grudge, think about things that have happened before, and we are forced to step out of the present situation of resolve. Use humor if possible. Make sure it's appropriate humor. And then also just remember the value of the relationship. So I think that this is a great resource. Actually, I shared this information with my family. It's interesting, with me being, involved in teaching, in the Department of Communication, and, studying it, doing research on communication. It is so easy not to communicate well, and we fall into some of these traps. And so as much as I feel often that I'm a good communicator, probably to my family, it might be a little different. So I did share some of this information with them as well. And we're kind of actively working through this as well. So let's move into just reviewing at this point some of the information that we pointed out at the very beginning, having to do with some of these definitions. Okay, and I think we're starting with Olivia. Olivia, do you have your information right now with regard to sharing about collaboration?
Yes, it's just the definition, correct?
Yeah, and just your comments on the importance of collaborating in conflict.
Okay. So for the definition of collaboration, I have the act of working together in order to complete or create a goal or a project.
Okay, right. Now, how do you see that being important with regard to this conflict resolution and cohesiveness?
I think that when you collab with someone or a group,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of like when you collab with someone, you say like, okay, let's collaborate. You're like working with this idea in mind that like, okay, we're both going to work together. We're both going to try our best to make this work and to like really make this something that we're proud of, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like everyone giving their true piece of the pie, if you will, it's just like, and remembering that the end goal is making that, that is interest-based. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate your comments. Next, let's go to Cassandra, and I think you have compromise.
Yeah, and so in the textbook it said the compromising style is when the group approaches to concede it for their goal, to kind of meet in the middle and find that middle ground approach.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. And I think you had mentioned a little earlier about that is, did you say avoidance is one of your traits that you were saying? How do you relate to compromise in small groups? Are you one to kind of compromise? Is that your strategy?
Yeah, I think compromising is a more passive approach to going around things. And so when it's like a group situation of like a project or something, then I'm just there to either, I don't like lead it, I'll just agree to go along with it more and compromise with whatever we're doing.
Right. Very good. Yeah, with that, I think it's very important to have your goals outlined or at the onset, to make sure that we know what that focus is in determining the outcomes. And so I think if the goal and objectives are clearly defined, it allows an easier compromise, because the goal is, everyone is set, collaboration is in place. So good to go. Thank you so much for sharing. Jennifer is next.
Okay, yeah, so I had the avoiding style, and it says it's a passive and non-confrontational approach to disagreement.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. What do you think of this approach with regard in small groups? Do you think it's effective?
I want to say no, because like it's just like, well, it depends. I guess like if you don't have anything to put in, then like you don't want to like let's say people or members avoid this style because they are unable to like contribute to the goal. That makes sense. So they just like stay away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think in the video we just watched, we've seen some of these elements in action. I love the different scenarios that they showed. I think that they were spot on as far as giving us that visual, in contrast to the skill or what they were trying to drive home. So I think they did a good job. Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. All right, I don't know if David is back. If not, let's go with Tage.
Yes. So my word is competition, and I've been looking through the textbook, and I couldn't find like a concrete definition of competition.
Uh-huh.
But my my opinion on it is that like, you're asking like what we think like the definition means, or how it applies to small groups, or
Yeah, basically within the small group dynamics, and I think we've touched upon it a little bit too. But how do you deal with? Let's put it this way: how do you personally deal with those avenues? We've kind of talked about the anger management, so it seems like you have definitely grown with those skills. But when you do see someone that might be overly competitive, that could be something that sparks this anger or disappointment.
yeah,
How
absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? So how can you maybe define that competition being problematic in small groups?
Yeah, because when you work in a group, the point is you're working as a team, and some people have, like, I think you can say like their own hidden agenda where they want to one up everyone else and
Yeah.
be better than succeeding as a whole team. They want to succeed as themselves and not really care for the well-being of the whole group. So that's where competition can come and play, because I think competitiveness is a good thing to have, a little bit of everyone, because it's a willingness and a desire and a drive to like want to do good and achieve. So I think it's good to be competitive, but like to a certain extent, to where like you want to like you want to do good, but you're willing to like do it as a group, and like you're not trying to like one up everyone else and like be better than the next person, because in the end you're a team, and like if you lose, they lose. If they win, you win. Like that's how you have to like approach it.
Very good. Yeah, that's the difference of in the competition. If it's for the group and the interest, then competition is healthy. And yeah, you've explained it perfectly. Thank you so much for sharing that comment. All right, let's see. Is Vitalik back? If not, we'll go to Merritt. Merritt.
My work is that meditation. Meditation, when conflict, the two, just example, I watched that video. I remember that we have to use the I language. We don't use the you. So we have to use I, and then instead of you, and then we have to encourage people, and this can reduce the conflict.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And even it gets so terrible sometimes in group dynamics, and where individuals might have their own agenda. For example, you might need a mediator to come in and try to do some problem solving. So yeah, if we learn these tools early on, it is very beneficial for us. And the reason why I really pointed out you guys knowing the definition of these 10 different terms is they will be on your upcoming quiz. So I just want to make sure that you have a handle on understanding the definition, so that you'll have an easier way of actually going through.
Let's take a look at this.
Your quiz. Okay, let's move forward. See what we have here next. We're talking about community and levels of conflict, looking into global conflict, community level in the workplace, and personal conflicts. And I believe this is a video that's pretty comprehensive. And if it's the one that I think, it is suggested by our department. So let's see if I can get into it. Yeah, so as you can see, it's a pretty long video, but it does, this is something that's recommended by our department, having to do with various areas of conflict. So we're gonna go ahead and view this, and then that's probably gonna take us out of the class. And so don't leave prematurely, if at all possible.
Global conflict. What role is played by the United Nations in resolving international conflict?
Just mention toxic waste dump in the Australian state of Victoria, and there's a conflict waiting to happen.
How does a major international company handle conflicts and relationships between its employees?
And Gina Wiseman takes us through a conflict over the introduction of video security cameras in a school.
We begin this edition with conflict on a global scale and the role of the United Nations. Here's Alison DiCarlo.
The dictionary tells us that conflict is a state of opposition or a clashing of opposed interests or principles. It can take place on many different levels, about many different things. Conflict is all around us. It can occur between two individuals, between small groups of individuals, between large groups of individuals, or even whole nations. When nations come into conflict with each other, or even opposing groups within nations come into conflict, it can ultimately lead to war, the most serious and devastating of all conflicts. The United Nations would always attempt to resolve these types of conflicts peacefully and try to avoid violence and war.
The United Nations is involved in many conflicts. We have the experience over more than 50 years. 1948, when the United Nations was established, its prime charter was peacekeeping and conflict resolution.
The United Nations started with 51 member countries. Today, there are 191 member countries. So, how does the United Nations resolve conflicts?
Well, first of all, they try to use diplomatic means, and this is a matter of a range of meetings between diplomats from different countries. The Secretary-General Kofi Annan plays a critical diplomatic role in trying to talk to both sides in a conflict and try to resolve the way in which the events are flowing. Once you get agreement from the parties that they are prepared to have an agreement, then there are trained mediators, trained within the United Nations processes, who go in and help both sides to keep the peace. I mean, it's one thing to sit at a conference table and agree to lay down arms and to achieve a peace, but that can be very volatile. There will be guerrilla players and others out there who don't want to see peace. So that's a very critical stage where very highly skilled mediators have to work not only with both sides but out in the community to ensure that there is a real will for peace in the broader community.
How does the United Nations establish a peacekeeping force?
That is normally done through the 15-member Security Council, 5 of whom are permanent members, 10 of whom are elected. And once agreement is reached at the Security Council, there is a call for countries to contribute. So Australia, for instance, has contributed to a number of peacekeeping operations over the years. And there have been more than 50 peacekeeping operations in the period 1948 to 2001.
Where has the United Nations been active lately?
Well, I guess one of the most obvious and most recent areas is East Timor. But there have been other peacekeeping operations, mainly in Africa and South America, and of course in Central Europe.
The United Nations works on various levels to try to avoid and resolve international conflict. Recent years have seen it play a key role in conflict resolution in many parts of the world. With uncertainty and instability, unfortunately a way of life for many across the globe, its role in international conflict resolution will continue to be critical.
From conflict at the international level to conflict at the community level. Let's take a look at local reactions to government proposals to build a major toxic waste disposal facility. Gina Wiseman reports.
Toxic waste disposal is an issue that every modern industrialised society has to deal with. In 1996, CSR, an international manufacturer of building products, with the support of the Victorian state government, decided to turn a quarry in the outer Melbourne suburb of Werribee into a dump for hazardous waste, such as heavy metals, asbestos and dangerous chemicals. A local residents' action group called RATTED, Werribee Residents Against Toxic Dumps, was formed to fight the proposal. Harry Van Morst was one of the founders.
Right from the word go, the intention of our campaign was to mobilise and inform and then mobilise the local community and keep it as a grassroots campaign. We organised a petition, and in a period of about 5, 6, 7 weeks, we got about 19,000 signatories. In a place the size of Werribee, that was a good proportion of the population saying no.
Was mediation between the residents and the company ever an option?
Mediation's a good way of dealing with some of these issues when the issue is still new, when it's fresh, when you're trying to mediate and consult about the problem and possible answers. Once you've already got one group, powerful group, saying these are the answers, then mediation's often not possible because you've got one group totally committed to answers, another group not even aware yet what the problem is but not liking the answers. And so instead of having a dialogue, you end up with a conflict.
Ratted quickly realised that government policies about waste disposal were inadequate. They researched the issue and came up with their own set of guidelines which they submitted to government.
We then started very heavy lobbying of members of parliament, saying, look, you've got a major conflict. We don't want this to develop the way it's going. We want a win-win solution. You need a new technology. We'd put all this to the panel already. So we'd worked out an alternative technology. We'd worked out alternative policies for how to site these facilities. And we'd set up a number of criteria for the experience of managers.
The final decision about whether the dump should or shouldn't go ahead rested with the State Minister for Planning. In April 1998, the Minister ignored Ratted's objections and decided the dump would go ahead. Werribee was in shock.
But the one thing we had done is prepare the community for that possibility. And we'd said, if the Minister says yes, within 3 days, we will have a massive meeting at the racecourse, because we knew it's the only place big enough to hold it. The Minister said it on the Thursday night, and we had the meeting on the Monday night. And in that time, the Werribee community obviously was just waiting for this to happen. 15,000 people on the cold Monday night turned up there, traffic jams everywhere. The meeting was half an hour late to start. And from that meeting, of course, you know, a massive amount of anger was there. And that's when we decided to organise the pickets. We organised non-violent workshops because one of our principles throughout the campaign had been to make sure it was non-violent and family-friendly. We talked to the local police about it. They knew what the score was. Some of them were local. They were on our side emotionally, but they had their job to do, of course. And so we made sure that in all of that there was good communication. It was always up front. In other words, we didn't do secret things and things that would surprise people and therefore cause overreactions. We made sure that everything was up front, well discussed beforehand, and done in such a way that whatever happened was able to be managed in a reasonable way, in the way people wanted it.
Ratted organised a boycott of CSR products and went to the annual general meeting for CSR shareholders. There they spoke to the CEO and management of the company about what actions they were going to take.
They were most surprised. They said, look, do you realise you might get arrested? And we said, yeah, and what are you going to do when an 84-year-old Italian grandmother gets arrested at the picket line? How are you going to look on TV? And his jaw dropped and he realised that he wasn't dealing with fools and people who hadn't thought it through. We'd thought through all the implications and we knew what we were doing. So we I think, made a lot of headway at that meeting because he was already, I think, doubtful about whether it should proceed.
Ratted kept up the community pressure and 4 months later the company decided not to build the toxic waste dump. The resolution of the conflict had other positive outcomes.
In many ways, CSR did us a favour by proposing this because they did two things in doing it. One is they changed government policy, I think forever, on the way that hazardous waste is dealt with, and has put far more pressure on industry to reduce and stop having this hazardous waste. And secondly, they unified our community in Werribee effectively because for the first time, perhaps, this community, which is a fast, young, growing community, was forced to unite.
Ratted was successful because it unified the entire local community and because it researched all the issues. It came up with counter-proposals that were much better than simply dumping toxic waste in the ground and led to a win-win situation that will benefit all communities.
While corporations sometimes come into conflict with those outside the organization, what about conflict within large companies?
Given that hundreds, even thousands of employees can work for the same employer in the same place, there's bound to be conflict. Here's Xavier Lockhart.
If workplaces have conflicts and they're allowed to continue, one of the prime causes of concern for that organisation is the impact on productivity, the impact on morale, and the general uneasiness felt across the organisation.
Most workplaces are complex, particularly those with a large number of employees. Having many people interacting with one another and relying on one another to get work done invariably leads to conflict.
There's a range of reasons for causes of conflict in the workplace, and the types of conflict in the workplace include personality differences. You also have differences in status, which lead to conflict in that some people don't necessarily appreciate the fact that their superior may ask them to do something and take offence to that particular time. There's the general aggressive type of conflict where, in terms of getting something actioned, be it at a office level, at a store level, in McDonald's circumstance, someone might use some physical force in order to achieve their means. So they're just some of the types.
Anytime people deal with other people, effective communication is vital. Failure to communicate effectively too easily leads to misinformation and misunderstandings. It's estimated that 80% of all conflict is caused by misunderstandings.
One of the key things that I talk to people about, and when we have sessions where there might be difficulties, is does everybody understand what we're talking about? You know, have we clarified all the points? Does everybody understand where we're going to from here or where we've come from?
When people work closely together, it's an environment where personal prejudices can often come to the surface. Also, when someone senses someone else is getting preferential treatment, jealousy can arise, which itself can become another form of prejudice against an individual or group.
The company deals with issues of jealousy and people who have prejudices by bringing those issues out onto the table. If someone has an issue with somebody, we're saying, what is it that causes you to feel jealous towards that person? Why is it that you feel, for example, that they may have been promoted ahead of you? And then we'd explain that if they say, well, I feel that I've been there longer and therefore I deserve to have got to a position higher than that person, it might need that you need to explain the fact that they might have brought other skills over and above that individual. Same with prejudices, you know, why someone has a built-in prejudice, and you might find that no matter how much you educate or try and reform that person, that prejudice is there. And unfortunately in today's society you need to act and enforce your standards and the standards, say, of a company like McDonald's, our values and behaviours upon that person. If they can't meet those values and behaviours, then unfortunately we don't tolerate people who maintain prejudices against individuals or other nationalities.
For some years now, companies and corporations have realized how important it is to have mechanisms for conflict resolution.
The company uses mediation after an initial complaint or incident has been lodged. And the purpose of mediation is to get the parties together, to get them to agree that they're going to sit down and try and resolve the differences, and we then work through with them what are the actual issues, what is really causing the conflict, can that conflict be overcome, and if so, how can it be overcome? And most importantly, in the mediation session, we get both parties to agree to the outcome. It's not an outcome that's imposed upon somebody.
So there's an onus put on employees to constructively resolve their conflicts. But there are also things that employers must do to act preventatively.
First and foremostly, they can educate employees about the workplace and what a workplace involves, and that is, it involves a diverse group of people who will have differences, but people need to be mature and to sit down and resolve those differences as they arise. Companies also need to ensure that they have strategies in place to deal with differences and to deal with them quickly, so they don't become issues bigger and broader than what they might be. It's also important, I think, for the CEO of the organisation to be quite clear about what is expected in terms of the values and behaviours required of the individuals.
Workplaces will always have a certain amount of conflict occurring within them. Managing this conflict requires willingness on the part of employees and management, and skill on the part of a mediator or counselor. As individuals, we'll always experience conflict. We've looked at conflict in various settings, and we'll finish by looking at a personal story of a student who came into conflict with his school. Here's Gina Wiseman again.
I'm standing in the grounds of Springtown High School. Over the past few weeks, this has been the scene of an ongoing conflict.
The school sent some letters home telling us it was going to install some security cameras, but we weren't really happy with the whole privacy thing, with the cameras being in our change rooms.
The school suspected drug dealing had occurred in various parts of the school over the previous few months.
Well, I was pretty angry about it, because, you know, when you're getting changed, you don't know who might be watching.
So what did you do?
I went to see the principal.
And what happened?
Well, it didn't go real well.
My first reaction was fairly dismissive, especially as Alan was clearly worked up over the issue. I took the point of view that we'd send a letter home to parents. There'd be no objections. End of story.
Oh, it's just like having Big Brother!
Alan! Alan, come back here, please.
But in hindsight, perhaps I could have given Alan more of a hearing.
Well, I probably went in there with the wrong attitude. I think she thought I was trying to tell her how to run a school.
So what was your response?
Well, I stormed out and smashed the first camera I saw, which was the one in the corridor.
And you got into trouble over that?
Yeah, I got kicked out of school, and then they told me I had to pay for the camera. I told them to go jump.
We asked Alan to leave the school. Quite clearly, we cannot tolerate vandalism.
But that wasn't the end of the matter. Lorraine Collis, the student welfare coordinator, visited Alan to see how he was getting on.
I knew what Alan had done couldn't be condoned, but I really thought in this case it should have been possible to reach a satisfactory resolution.
The problem was that when Alan and the principal first met about the issue, neither really adopted any of the strategies that are more likely to end in an outcome where there are positives for both.
When two people try to resolve a conflict, they shouldn't try to out-yell each other. Each person needs to show that they are prepared to listen and accept the other person's point of view. Another important point is not to put down the other person. We talk about making I statements. That is, declaring your own position firmly without degrading the other point of view.
So you were able to speak with both Alan and the principal separately after he'd been asked to leave?
I did, and the principal was happy to discuss the matter further, provided it was done appropriately and not in the way that it had taken place the first time.
So, after that, I decided I should go through the proper channels.
Enter the Student Council, or more specifically, Emily Langer. It was no accident that Emily was elected to be president. She, it turns out, is a skilled negotiator. First of all, Alan and Emily met under the direction of Lorraine Collis. Alan stated his problem with the school rules, that security cameras were an invasion of student privacy.
Well, some students had already complained, but this was the first time anyone had ever tried to destroy one of the cameras. Alan's not a vandal, and he really believed he had a point to argue.
In a meeting convened by the Student Welfare Coordinator, Emily, Alan and the principal met to thrash out the issues. The meeting went well and followed a mediation process. The principal was able to state the school's point of view and her grievances over the way Alan had behaved. Alan and Emily were able then to describe their grievances. Each party then had a chance to respond to what the other had said.
Well, as mediator, I was able to summarise the points of agreement and disagreement. Both parties agreed that it was right to try and stamp out drug dealing in the school if in fact it was occurring.
I could see why they thought cameras were a good idea, but I still didn't like them being in the change rooms. Although I knew I'd done the wrong thing by smashing one of them.
While Alan further disagreed that expulsion from school had been an appropriate form of punishment.
So what was the outcome?
Well, in the end we decided the school had the right to put in place whatever rules it wanted to.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Very much, Alan. And look, thanks for your intervention. You were really good. I think you've got a big future in it. I agree that it was uncomfortable for students to be getting changed, knowing that a security camera could be on them. I understood that Alan had never vandalised anything before and that his reaction was one of perhaps anger or frustration. So I agreed that he could come back to the school.
A further meeting between Alan, Emily and the welfare coordinator came up with a proposal that security cameras be taken out of the change rooms. Staff would keep the change rooms locked and they would only be used by students when an appropriate teacher was in there with them.
I liked the way that Alan and the Student Council worked through the conflict with Lorraine. Not only did they put forward their objections, but they also made suggestions as to what could be done instead. It meant that there were positives both for the students who were uncomfortable about the cameras and for the school in its efforts to stamp out drug dealing.
Yeah, I think it's turned out well in the end. I still have to pay for the camera, but that's fair enough. The main thing is my friends and I are happy we don't have cameras in our change rooms.
We can see here how much difference using a mediator can make. When conflict occurs, sometimes the first reaction can be impulsive, like when Alan damaged school property. Often, an objective third person's involvement helps conflicting parties to reach an agreement.
Okay, we are going to finish up here. Has given us some great tools in the various categories, and I think we've learned quite a bit about these 4 areas. And we'll pick up again on this on Friday. And I hope that you guys had some good takeaways on this. And yeah, good job. Thank you everyone for your participation. I think everyone learned quite a bit today. And do you have any questions, concerns? Everybody good to go? All right. Thank you so much for hanging in there. And I really do appreciate, I so appreciate you guys hanging in there. And I will see you on Friday. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye.